Okay, we're starting up in daylight sort of thing. It's, I don't know what it is, it's kind of warmish, coldish, hottish, warmish, greenish, bluish. That's good, just tip that over there. With you in a second. So what we've got here on the Reloved Guitars bench in medium shot O vision is John's Aria. I'm just going to look at my notes. So we've got an Aria here, bolt-on Les Paul style, and I'll fly around that in a minute. That's who's turned up in their Land Rover out there. Aria Les Paul bolt-on neck, replacement Tusq adjustable nut. Yes, it will go. Gonna make some truss rod access. Don't know who that is. Lady in a Land Rover looking for Roger, possibly. So we've got high action. No, wrong one. Sorry. So I've got a new bridge ordered for this. A new nut, adjustable Tusq nut, and open up the intonation, open up the truss rod access, because at the moment none of the sockets that John's got, and I just checked mine, actually don't fit in there as well. So what I think is, I don't think there's any fret leveling going to be done on this one. That's what I see. Is it? Let me just say, no, there isn't. So strings are supplied, but we've ordered in and got the bridge, which is here. I'll go and find that. Okay, so this is not, I mean, we weren't talking about action here, I don't think. So this is an interesting thing. We've got a couple of different things, slightly unusual things for these guitars, in that they're not necessarily all involving a change in action, therefore the setup, generally speaking. So it's a pity in a way, because you know this could probably do as much as anything else with an improved setup. But anyway, that's not exactly true, because I did play it last night and the frets are quite low anyway, and I think we're going on a sort of, I think John's on a budget with this. So new Tusq nut, change the bridge, clean up, check everything out, make sure it all works. I was playing it last night. It's a nice guitar actually, so we're not going to delve too deeply in it. So what I'll do is I'll just take you on a flying tour of the guitar. So looking at it from a bit of a distance, I'm not on the microphone, head-mounted microphone here, because it's currently charging, because I forgot to charge it again last night. Sort of trouble when you're doing too many jobs over a weekend. So Les Paul style, it's got a belly carve, which is nice. It's got some yellowed and cracked old pickup rings. Down the end here, we've got a nut that really doesn't like the gauge of string that John's running, which is a 10 to 52s. So we could either sort of carve away at this plastic thing, which I don't think is really good value for money, or we'll replace it with an adjustable, well, I say adjustable, we'll replace it with a Tusq nut, which I've also got somewhere. Yeah. No, actually, we'll do it with a standard adjustable, because it does spread the strings out sideways. I don't know what I'm thinking. Standard one. So on the back, we've got the Aria 3-bolt fitting thing with a slightly sculpted cutaway and stuff. So it's a nice access here, and a sort of very 80s-ish Kramer meets Westbury headstocky type thing. This neck is creaking a little bit in operation, and I can see that it's got a little bit of splintering going on around the edge of the finish here, which means something's happened around there, which I don't quite know. At the moment, everything sort of looks okay for lowering the action a bit further down, but we'll kind of see as we get a bit more onto the Covers Lake. But what we've got down here as we fly up to this end is we've got hard to see really, but a bit too congested, if I'd be American I'd say, too congested of access for the truss rod here, and can't actually get good old honest old fashioned sockets of the type that need to get in there. So that's pretty much unadjustable. So I'm going to need to chisel away into there, obviously very carefully. Sorry about the close-ups, not very good, are they? Yeah, we're going to need to chisel away into there, and that's kind of a primary concern of John's really, because if you, whoops, oh blimey, I'm so sorry. If you look, these delicious little tools he's got here don't fit in there, nor does mine for Gibson. So they kind of messed up a bit on the access. So, like I say, it's a, oh my blasted wrist. I've got loads of problems. So what I'm looking for is a Tusq adjustable. Here it comes. Oh, I've only got 3 more of those stashed. Blimey, better get another order in. I'm currently got my humidityometer out in the other room because I desperately need to be able to do some spraying for the guitars I'm refretting, which is, one of them is John's other guitar, which is, no, it's not John's yet. I'm going to do that one later. The 2 I'm refretting is, one is a CMI vintage Telecaster, and the other one is a, I'll get there, the GS2 Gordon Smith. So all the frets and everything are cut. Oh no, these are with bases. Okay. Samuel. So I'm going to use a lowish bass here because I think this is going to be a relatively shallow slot as far as these things go. Now, there is an issue with this. I've just got to double check on this. Okay, we're good. That's, the string spacing is great, right on. I had a concern that when I planned to fit these adjustable Tusq nuts, the only kind of downside, if any, is that when you order a specific solid Tusq nut for any guitar, you can usually home in on the correct one by choosing through Tusq's variety of dimensions and so on. When you're starting from the position you're using a Tusq adjustable and using one of my printed basses, you're sort of committed to whatever spacing comes with that, because it's only one, and it tends to work with Gibson Les Paul type spacings. So we'd be sort of committed to that. Now, here we have an interesting situation. We've got a well finished in nut, but it isn't glued in by a ton of finish. So we do have to break the finish seal on here, which is a shame in a way. So let's start by slacking these strings off. The gauge of the string is really not helping this guitar at all, and so this doesn't stay in tune. Although I have to say, by default, it has a lovely low first fret action, so that's kind of well done. But as far as the actual, I'm going to turn the big lights on actually. As far as the playability of it, if it doesn't stay in tune, then it kind of doesn't really matter how good the action is. So I don't know if you can see from where you're, maybe you can see. This is a very smoothly vintagely finished bit of poly, and people kind of say things like, oh yeah, just get your craft knife or whatever it is, and cut away, score away a line down there. Now that's exactly what I'm trying to do now. I'm being actually quite prepared for this to chip and flake, which it's starting to do, because no matter how precisely you work this thing, Polly is brittle. She is indeed. So I've scored down that edge and that edge for what it's worth, and because you can't, basically you don't know where the nut sits, right, as far as this shelf goes, so you hope you're scoring along the join of the nut to its underlying shelf. That's my plan, but I actually don't know if that's the case, so I'm going on a sort of wish and a prayer really. For all I know, this shelf could actually be deeper than I'm currently cutting, and the blue finish could rise up over that. So I'm just cutting as well as I can along what I think is the join line, or logic tells me is, but it's not a guaranteed certainty. And then I'm going to gently run down again the edge here. What I'm doing is I'm breaking the lacquer, but it's, no matter how well you do it, it's going to be very difficult to extract an ancient nut like this without some degree, let's just prop that against there for a minute, some degree of splintering, some kind of, thanks, getting bitten by the string wasps as I score my way along again. And then people would say, yes, 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 but you cut that all, and then what you do is you squeeze this knife down the front of here. Well, I promise you, you don't. There is no gap that you can get your knife down. So at this point in time, the thing is either going to chip off with a tap on the hammer, or it isn't going to. And that's how it rolls, I'm afraid. And what we know is this has to come off because this plastic nut is not playing well at all. So I can feel the glue cracking there very slightly, and there it's leaning forward a little bit. So I'm looking at where the paint goes, and the paint does actually run up at the front a little bit. Now this is a bit where we can apply some logic that we used before, and that was, let's control the damage, shall we? If there's going to be damage on this front edge, let's see if we can control it and not leave it to the laws of gravity and physics. So if we say this is the join point, let us cut a little line in there and make this work to our requirements and not the requirements of glued finish, which there it is. Okay, and now that is probably enough to release the Kraken. See that? So it's loose now. And what we don't quite know is where it's held. It still appears to be held on the front of this front of the nut here. So I'm going to cut inwards and downwards. I don't care if I cut a bit of the plastic, actually, frankly. So I just really want to break the adhesion of this nut to whatever it's holding to. Now, having done that, I can now see that it's permanently glued to the underlying wood. So it's now no longer attached to the front edge, it's now glued to the wood. Let's have a look down this side and see if we can see where it actually comes off. Yeah, well, it's going to come off, but it's going to take some wood with it, which isn't a problem, because if we lose a little bit of height, we can... Well, actually, it's been shimmed, or is it? No, what is it that's come off? There's something like a shim that's come off. It has been shimmed, yeah. Okay, so it's lost, it's sort of peeled off the shim part of it. That's fine. Let's clean up under here so we can see what we're doing with the old truss rod cover as well. Adjuster, I should say. Let's try and cut off the remaining plastic from the shim. And that's there, you can see I'm getting underneath that. There we go. That's good. A little bit in the corner up here. Well, that's reasonably successful given how tightly fitted all that was. Horrible plastic thing. Okay, that probably is almost the right height, but I will get a number 2 bass out, because Gerard very brilliantly made a few different varieties of these basses. He made 3s, 2s and 1s, and amazingly I can switch between them. So if I think that a 2 is going to be a better proposition here, I will dial this one out like this. Now at the moment the bass part, the bass doesn't have at the moment a particular front or back. It might do if I start sanding it at all, but let's go a little bit taller and then see where we start out with that. Okay, so those are dialed in. Let's just put this in place to have a feel. Yeah, that feels about spot on for this. Oh yes. the actual binding is a fraction wider than the actual nut on here, but that's not a big deal. It's a small price to pay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dial these out of here again in a minute, and I'm going to do a couple of quick-ish things. The first one, keep the one we want to hand. First one is I'm going to wind the grub screws back in a fraction, and the aim then will be to run these up and down on here and flat back the feet. The reason I'll do this is because I like to have, if possible, I like to have more, I like to have flatter grub screw feet than pointy ones. And these are, I think they call them cup point or something. They're not quite, not pointy and sharp like the cone ones, but they are still have a ring around them which potentially digs into the finish a little bit. So this little exercise here is my way of making sure that when it's fitted, it distributes the weight as well as it possibly can, given that it's standing on plastic, resiny sort of stuff. So I just basically take this down until it's as flat as I can make it by hand, which isn't too bad, and that becomes my weight-bearing feet. Now, there's a couple of kind of questions somewhere along the line in the week that were posed to me about, somebody commented on the video saying, well, considering that Gibson bridges bend over the years, you know, some of those old Tune-o-matic bridges warp and buckle over the years, and I've seen reports that they do indeed do that. Somebody then sort of said in a not very conversational way, so you're saying that your Tusq nut is stronger than the metal of a Tune-o-matic bridge? And I wasn't saying that at all. Interestingly, all I ever said was that let me get some wood glue. All I ever said was that, in fact, this I have so far, in 2 years of using them on my guitars and customer guitars, I have not yet so far had one fail to work or create a problem. So of course I'm not saying that in 30 years time nothing will happen to the loading of the strings on this piece of Tusq sitting on 2 grub screws. I would be foolish to suggest that because I have no idea whatsoever. What I can tell you is only this, is that for 2 years good performance, it's cost, if it's 25 quid to do one of these for somebody, but as part of the setup, it's more expensive, it's just that I'm doing, but as part of the setup for 25 notes, then I think this would, I could tell you that right away it breaks down to a grand total of £12.50 a year so far, and for perfect tuning stability and an ideal first fret action, I'm quite content that that particular £12.50 is a great value. Now I suspect that it will go on and perform way better than that for way longer than that, but I don't know yet, so I can't make an absolute statement about that. But if it does, then it will turn out to be even better yearly, you know, price per pounds per year value. So that's how I'm basing this on. So I think that's a, you know, no, I'm not saying ... People do that, you know. It's there was a classic one with Jordan Peterson, the author, and Kathy Newman on Channel 4, was it? She did that horrible thing of misreading what he said and saying, so what you're saying is, and he kept saying, no, that's not what I'm saying. And she said, kept coming back to him, so what you're saying is you hate women. And he said, no, that's not what I'm saying. And he just carried on like that, and it was a ridiculous set of exchanges, but it was infuriating, and people seem to do it these days a lot. And what it really means is, I've got this in my head, and that's what I believe about what you mean. And nothing you can say or do is going to get in the way of that, because I must come back to what I think you are saying and meaning. So that's this is that. I don't know, at this point in time, I don't know how well wood glue is going to hold this. I don't really like using super glue anymore, although it does work. I'm trying to make things as easy as possible for the next person who comes to do anything on it. But we'll see. If this pops off and it just doesn't work, then we will sort that out. Now, what I'm going to do is, when you use one of these adjustable nuts, I recommend that you take the strings off outside inwards, and I recommend you put them on inside outwards, if you get what I mean. So the idea being is that you put on the central two first to anchor the nut in place, and you take off, sorry, if you're putting on, you put the central two on first, and then you put the other ones on. If you are, there you go, that doesn't hold it very well. I might, for this case, because there's no slot for it to sit in, I may actually go against my will and put a tiny dab of super glue on. Yeah, so start, when you're putting them on, load from the middle outwards, and when you're taking them off, take off from the outwards inwards, if you get what I'm at. So it prevents the insert part, which is by definition loose, it's meant to be. It prevents it from flying off in all directions, which it can do because it's meant to be detached or loose. God, it's suddenly become really humid here now, because what's happened is, after days of rain, it has suddenly decided to clear up, which is a bit of a surprise. Oh gosh. Now, the reason I kind of wanted to use something other than super glue, and it still applies, is that to use super glue, you've got to be pretty much bang on with your positioning the first time you place it down, like that. Oh, not like that, like this. You have to know it's exactly where you need it to be, otherwise it will wander around. Now, if you aren't convinced of that, see, sometimes the glue just doesn't want to hold it at all. So maybe you've got more time. Let's try this. Put it on, hold it down. You can never tell on certain days if you put it on with glue, it's stuck instantly and you have no chance to decide when and where. So in this case, I'm going to put it down, I'm going to push it with my finger to where I know it needs to be, and then I'm going to let it hold that there for a bit. Yeah, so people do that thing of, what you mean is, what you're saying is, and the answer is no, it's not what I'm saying, but it's clearly what you want to think I'm saying, and then the sort of misinterpretation can continue. Okay, so that's that on. So while we've got that on, I think really technically I should leave that for a few minutes and not do anything, but I'm kind of keen to be carrying on. Yeah, it's gone very humid in here. Which I was going to go and check the other room for. It feels humid out here too. I'm going to check it. Yeah, 67 is a bit high. We'll see what it does. 19 degrees and 67. It's not too high, I don't think, for doing. It's not too high for poly, but it would probably be too high for nitro. There's a thing out here that I had an idea to do originally, and here we've got a pretty, a fairly useful potential airflow through here, which normally is left closed. And I was thinking of putting a hole in here. Interestingly, people have been in and out of here adjusting these, which is, of course, they have to do. It's the main control panel, so I'm always conscious that people are in and out of the Reloved workshop. But the idea was then that maybe I could put an expel air type thing in here and take advantage of this vent space out to the real world. And even if it was just that I'd put a hole there and open the cupboard door to let there be an air vent to help us along the way. For some reason, This just does not want me to use the zoom. Where have you gone? Little spindly thing. Wow, great lighting. Not. Okay. So I've left it open in the hope that a bit of air percolates through there, but I don't think it will. Shall we see if we've had any success with this staying in place? Snack these off. Be good if I could take this off and nothing move, really. Yeah, maybe. Let's see if, hope that that's it. If not, we'll have to redo it with some more. What you can't always tell is the condition of the surface and how smoothly it sits, because sometimes that little bit of glue isn't enough to fill any irregularities on the wood, and then it doesn't then sit in the right place quite. So here we have, I'm going to remove the old bridge and hopefully just do a quick comparison. A little higher, tiny bit higher, possibly, but pretty much the same. So I'm going to, for now, just place the new bridge onto the posts. It seems to sit down there quite well. When I dial it down, it doesn't automatically sit down. You have to press it down a little bit. Now, while I'm here, the next task is how do we get access to this little thingy? So it's going to have to be a small chisel. It possibly could be a Dremel-y spinning thing. That's one way, but a chisel is probably a simpler way to begin. Now, what we don't actually know for 100% sure is what the overall thickness of the material is going to be here. Now, we might be able to take a guess, a fairly good guess at it. Is to say, let's go towards the back end where it meets the thing. We'll say that that's 16 mils of material, of which we can say we're 9 in depth terms. So there's about 7 mils of room underneath this wood here. Let's double check that for sense. Yeah, 16 mils, 7 in, that gives 16, 7, what did I say? How many in did I say? It was 7, wasn't it? Sorry, 9. And that meant 7 of clearance. That's not a lot of clearance room, but it's enough to make sure we're safely on the track. I can't really see very well. There we are. So the idea is we've got no access underneath this thing, so we're going to have to create some access. Now it's going to be covered. What I'm struggling with a bit here is getting a start in this, because it's got a quite a thick layer of finish under here, which may be partly why it's hard to get under there. So I'm going to have to take it down, but as I'm sort of making obvious here, is I can't actually. The problem I've got is without cutting down a little bit more, I can't actually get underneath the bolt head to gain more access. But so I'll have to cut down a fair bit more aggressively to get into that place. But then I probably will have a go at getting one of the Dremel type things in there. Okay, so we'll try and clear a bit of detritus out. Okay, so a bit of space, but not a lot of room. Let's have a scrape around. So with a Dremel, I can probably. It's not so clever. With a Dremel, I can probably dig down a little bit. Maybe get the tip of a little routing thing under there. But I think to begin with, my best bet is to get a little bit of depth going from that point inwards. So a slower slope, but you can see I'm having to kind of work off the raised edge at the front here, which is preventing it totally good access, I have to say, but we'll get some degree further into the access out of it. Yeah, I mean, chisel can't really move that much down there. We run out of space. Yeah, and we can sort of try and expand the sides a little bit. Sorry, this isn't a very good shot because it's almost impossible to work on this and get a close-up of it at the same time. So I'm sort of scraping around underneath to try and clear a bit of access. I mean, really, we only want as much as is required to get this to bite onto the end, and it's nearly there. But it tells me that it's also got to start a little bit earlier. Now, I could kind of scrape inwards from here, or sort of tap in from here at a sharp angle, which would do it. There, I've chipped a bit off, which is fine. And I'm working off trying to start the slope earlier, so we can get that back end of the, that thing in, because in a way it's that has to get in deep enough to make contact with the thing, and if that's too shallow, which it is, we aren't getting anywhere. Now, if I'm not comfortable working with the wrong device, what am I looking for? No, not that device. If I'm not confident working with, well, actually it is the right device. If I'm not confident working with the chisel in and around that place, that area there, what I can do is bring up the noisy thing, and I can use a little or one of several types of things to cut in. But the first thing I'd probably do is go and have a sort of dig around my various options in terms of cutting things. And there's this little tiny little I don't know what the word would be. There's little router, tiny little router things. We've got some small little burr type things that will also help if we can find them. I can't bloody find them, it's typical, isn't it? There's one for engraving. Well, that's not really going to do the biz now, is it? Okay, so somewhere there are usually some little devices attached to a magnet somewhere, which I seem to, oh no, there's possibly some. Is that one here, please? Yes, all right, a little burry cutter thing. So we can have a go with these and cut down into the wood, and that will clear a bit of material without having to lean on this front edge, because what I don't want to have happen is leaning on this front edge to create a pressure and a split off material. So I'm going to do a bit of dentistry to get some depth here. It's like being at the dentist, isn't it? Thank you. So what I've done is just lowered it, so we're almost on, but we've got to take a little bit now from the middle section, which I'll do with this as well. So as you can see, it's a sort of fairly controlled, slow process for getting the thing in, and it still doesn't want to go in underneath, because one of the big problems is there's no room underneath. So for that, I'm probably going to have to start trying to go down the side with a very fine one, and then kind of try and go underneath with a very fine one afterwards. So we'll see how effective we can be. So the problem is you can't take anything out to do this, because well, you can't pull the fingerboard off and try it. So it's sort of micro dentist surgery. So pardon me if I don't worry too much about what you can see for a minute, but I'm now kind of going in with my very fine tools up as close as I can to the that thing, whatever it's called, the adjuster, sort of scraping backwards and removing as much material as I can that could obstruct the adjuster. Sideways might be better. Now I'm going to try and get far under as I can with it. I'm concerned that if I'm not careful, it may strike or grind the corners off the adjuster itself. So I don't want that to happen at all possible. What do we have done before Dremels? Slowly. Right. So these are longer sockets. Well, that's not going to work. It's too long by miles. That one. Oh yeah, we're just about on with that one. That's not bad. For some reason, that one likes attaching better than that one. Is that because it's actually a different size? It could be a different size. Yeah, that is a different size. Okay, well, mine isn't the right one, but at least we've made it. We've created access with this one, which is the important thing. It doesn't go on as far as I would like. I don't know if that's because there's still material caught under there. Can sort of try and help it on its way by just thinning this down a little bit. View, it's crap, I know. I'm just trying to level out that slope, smooth out that slope, I should say, to make sure that this socket has the best possible reach. Including as far underneath there as we can do. Well, it's good enough to make the adjustment. There we go. Counterclockwise. Ooh, crunch, creak. Ooh, blimey, that is definitely. To call that relieved is a sort of understatement. That actually feels relieved. I mean, it may not be the right amount of relief. That's not the point. But the point is, in turning it, we've now got something that's like. What I can do, given this, is I can actually remove this now with a bit of luck. And once removed, we can take a little bit more out from underneath it, which should make it easier to access it further down, get a tighter grip on it. It should be one of these that just comes off. We shouldn't have any major problem putting it back on. Crossez les fingers. So I'm leaving the humidity monitor out there for the next hour or so, and if the temperature warms up and the wet air disappears enough, then I might be in a position to get a couple of coats of poly on those necks or those fingerboards, and that's really what I'm after, because this is the tricky bit, getting this off and back on, because these are now a bit too short to pull it all the way to the end, and a bit too short therefore to put it back on comfortably without a bit of fiddling and faffing. But now that's out, I can probably get somewhere with the chisel in there, pretty carefully. Oh God, and the wasps. Sorry. I'll try my best not to hector customers who leave sticky out bits. I know I did that to I think Buzz the other day. I was bitching about his string knots or loops or something, and it was like, don't do that, it drives me bloody mad, because it's always me that gets to cut my fingers on trying to remove them. Right, so what I'm doing, just going to quickly do here is just going to scrape, if I can, scrape the paint or whatever's built up on the side of this brass adjuster off, because I don't want anything really getting in the way of this gripping. Well, maybe it would, maybe it wouldn't, but with a bit of luck, this will be a bit smoother and cleaner for the socket to grip. Yeah, I reckon so. Well, that's pretty tidy. I'll give you a close-up look for those who are even vaguely interested. Dun, 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 dun. Look at that, much tidier. Obviously, the paint that was in there from the spray job is gone. That's what we have to come to expect if we're going to clean it out and gain that bit of extra access. Where are we? There we are. So now I'm going to try the slightly tricky job of encouraging this to go back on. I've got a big fly in this workshop now that's decided to come along and cheese me off. Okay, this is fitting on okay. This is doing all right. We'll get there. And once it's on a bit further, then the whole barrel of the adjuster, the socket will go further in, and we'll have a bit better clearance, and we'll be able to make a proper adjustment when the new strings are on. Or actually when the, yes, it's going to be new strings because we're not doing any leveling, Sam, remember? Yes, I remember. There we go. So now it's on far enough to get the socket all the way in, and look at that for a nice clean bite. Beautiful. Hey, what a thing, eh, to put on your news app this morning and find Paul Mariner, famous England and Ipswich player, is dead at 68. You think to yourself, he's only 10 years older than me. So all your subscribers here should continue to watch this channel, because statistically there's a very high chance of me dying of typical old man natural causes right here on the channel. Don't mean to be macabre or anything, but you know, I'm of that age and I'm clearly very unfit, relatively unfit. There you go, look, John, that's your baby. Hoo-ha. It's not a Gibson size one, it's slightly smaller, so that solved that mystery. That can go back on its little magnetic peg. There's your leftover bridge. There's your crappy nut. Sorry, I don't mean that as an insult, but there's your crappy nut that you don't want on there anymore. And hang this baby out of the way. Thank you for your service. I always like to say that to my, what do you call them, Dremel-y things. Now I'm going to put some of the key Dremel-y grindy bits back on the wall because I like to have them magnetically available at all times. So I'll use that magnet there, stick those to that, toing, dangle that one off there, a couple of wood cutty things, and these drill bits can go here. Lovely. All right, so I've put the bridge on. I'll do just straight off before I go and clean everything up and put new strings on. I'm going to just get this thing playing the best it can with the strings and whatnot that it's got. That's very good. Something like that, boy. And I think we'll also, given that we're going to also replace with this gauge of strings, we can use this current setup now to adjust the adjust the truss rod, get the right amount of space into there. Now the good thing about this Tusq adjustable is that it handles a large gauge string brilliantly. It's a great example, by the way, of this thing that people do where they insist that you have, a nut must be cut for the exact strings you're playing in. This Tusq adjustable nut evidently caters for strings up to whatever 13 gauge, if whatever you choose to have, it'll cater with it. So the slots must be well big enough to do that, and yet there's no problem. So we got a bit more adjustment downwards. We probably need all of that. This bridge is taller than the last one, but that's the price we got to pay. Now, actually, the action was probably, when I got the guitar, was probably at this height already. And John wasn't saying about lowering it particularly, but it's about a millimetre higher than it needs to be. So I can start by sending it right down to the ground here, and similarly down on this side, and see what we end up with at its bottom. Now, if we want any less than that, we will have to grind the bridge, but actually that's coming in at 1.5 and 1.5, and that's not it's a lot better than it was from the beginning, so I'm not going to worry. I think I'll leave it at that. Also, don't forget, we're not going to do any fret leveling with this. So the idea will be, we'll have to be governed by what the frets will allow. It copes with it. That's good. Well, we're getting close to where we want to be with this, which I'm pleased to say. Next stage, a good clean-up, followed by new strings and a stretch out and an intonate check. I've put the screws facing backwards on this one because it's so close here. Well, I don't think we get access over this bridge pickup, so we may need a little bit of intonation tweaking, but that's sitting right down on its haunches. The first fret action is actually a tiny bit higher than it needs to be, so we can take that down a little bit on both sides, and that has a huge impact on the playability of the guitar. Puts it out of tune, obviously. Now, what I noticed is there wasn't any relief in the guitar neck, which would have made a problem with the low action. Oh yeah, I'm liking that. I mean, it's a lot better than it was, so very, very nice. Now, one thing remember I've slacked off the truss rod, and we've now got quite a bit of relief in that, so we can improve that even more because we don't need all of that relief. That's a little bit more than we need, so we can take the friendly adjuster device and we put it in there, and we probably have to move the G and the D out of the way for a minute. We put that in there and we go back past I'm going the wrong way, silly me. We come to the bite point which is this way, clockwise, and then we'll pull some, get the actual thing out. We'll put some pressure on the truss rod in the clockwise department, and we'll level it out a little bit. Still maybe a little bit much, but it's going to be a lovely change. A tiny more of an adjust, but not much more. And let's see how it settles like that for a minute. Apart from putting it out of tune, which you expect. Right, don't worry about all that. We'll worry about the tuning in a minute. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the amount of relief that's in there. No, I'll take a bit more off. It's still high-ish. No, it's not high, it's workable, but let's use the truss rod. Given that this thing came to me with no relief at all, bearing in mind we're also using very thick gauge strings, so we want to control it a little bit, and it's controlling it, but it takes quite a bit of force because of these large gauge, heavy gauge strings. So we'll put a bit more of a pull on it. It's working beautifully though, the truss rod. I'll give it that much. I mean, that's how to make a guitar with incredibly heavy, well, relatively heavy strings feel light as a feather. It's now, because of the flattening of the neck, this now needs a tiny tweak on adjustment here, but just little tiny things, and tune it, sort of. Oh yeah. That is blinding, I have to say. It's a really good improvement for not a lot of money, relatively speaking, you know, not having done fret work. But it's also convenient because the frets on this are fairly worn, so it wouldn't be a great economy to be doing fret work on this particular guitar. You know, and I've sometimes had to say to people, to couch it in those terms, which is, you know, yes, I could do that, but it's not a great economy for you. Let's do from the outside in, shall we? As I say, it doesn't make financial sense to spend, you know, a fair bit of money on the setup when the frets are already that low. So in this case, you know, it was about looking at what's the maximum impact you can have. Well, certainly replacing the bridge because it didn't have the correct amount of intonation travel that John needed, which it doesn't. It's a horrible little thin vintage tunematic, but also fixing the permanently out of tuneness created by that horrible plastic nut in combination with John's heavy gauge strings. So those, and then making it neck truss rod adjustable, which it hasn't been because no tool would get in there. So those things for this old guitar have made a substantial difference, I'm pleased to say. That was not undone. No wonder I couldn't take that off. You could have told me. Yeah, so a big difference for, you know, the relatively least amount of time but also pragmatic. Even if the money and the time were there, you know, the point is this would be one of those, I'd say, first of all, I can't hear any chokes or anything particularly, so it's over the years it's been either tweaked or played itself into kind of evenness, which sometimes happens. The older the guitar gets, the lower the frets get and so on. It tends to kind of even out and you get a sort of equilibrium. But you know, it's not always the case, but in this case it seems to be. Now this is a little bit tight fitting. This doesn't want to come off unless you take it off a little bit by little bit. But the other one was like that too, so can't really say much about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this so then clean underneath it this thing, the scratch plate. The pickup surrounds are what they are, unfortunately. They're broken, but they're kind of cosmetic and they're part of the mojo, so it's not really something that we have to fix. It's not going to make any difference. It's purely how it looks. That one's a bit rusty, but gives us better access to clean underneath and get it looking and feeling a bit fresher. These are all down on the stops, which I'll leave them right there. We'll get a nice, well, get a grubby cloth first to get rid of the immediate dust, and then we'll get some cleaners, naphtha or Coleman's cooking fluid onto it to clear it up a bit more. And then we'll scrub the fingerboard a bit with the naphtha as well, Coleman's I should say. Now, all I'm really going to check, this neck here has, neck joint has some kind of visual damage, and it looks like it's sticking out a bit. That top one's being kind of mashed a little bit. So it could be explained, it could have some explanation for why that's not a very good condition there. I don't really know. I'm going to just sort of have a feel of it right here. It feels like it's done up very tight, as is this one. I have to say, I mean, it's stable enough. I heard a little bit of creak, but that's been done up deliberately very hard, and I'm not really in the mood to take it apart and see, but because it's performing as it should, and it's at the right angle and everything. So given that they're not falling out or there's no looseness that I can feel, not that you'd really be able to adjust that one at all, but they are kind of solid. The issue here is if it has split that finish a little bit there because it was done up too tight, there actually isn't anything to be saved or improved by undoing it and, you know, having another go at it. It is where it is. The paint won't suddenly fling itself back on. It's just how it is now. But it could be one of the telltale signs that when you do a bolt-on neck too hard, that's what you get. You can get chipping, and also on guitars like Strats you can get splits that emanate from the corners of the pockets as well. Now, there's a long-running friendly debate about whether those in fact are just finishes in the lacquer, or the finish I should say, or whether they are more significant and progress or proceed or carry on into the wood, because obviously what we know is that they are definitely lacquer splits. There's no disputing that, and the only thing under discussion is whether it's also in the wood. There's been an interesting debate. There are different schools of thought, and then people get very passionate and argue quite fiercely for it, as with a lot of things guitar wise. Unfortunately, there's a lot of insulting and name calling and grandstanding that can go on. My take on it has always been one of, I hope, sort of boring, cold logic, you know, and based on my own observations rather than anyone else's take on something. So when it's come to these cracks, I kind of have reserved a kind of conclusion, but I've always been of the opinion that stress is clearly being shed in those places. It's venting or expressing itself. So they're under some sort of stress. The issue that gets debated so heatedly is, of course, whether as the stress is shed, is it just the lacquer of the wood itself? And I've always been of the mind that I think it's often both. I'm prepared to accept that occasionally it may just be one, but I have to say, I'm probably of the view it's more likely. I would sense that it's more likely to be both rather than just the finish. Now, that's an unpopular view, it seems, because, you know, everyone then says, well, my guitars have got them, and I've never, and they've never been under pressure, and it just forms naturally when the finish shrinks and all of that. And I don't dispute that. I'm absolutely certain that when a finish shrinks, you will absolutely, you know, you may get it tightening up around the wood that remains the same size, or the other way around is that the wood shrinks and the finish remains the same size. So the stress of that disjunction has to go somewhere. The question is, how do you prove it? And of course, the only way you can prove it is to take every guitar with those types of cracks, pull it apart and examine the underlying wood. And it's, truth to tell, it's nigh on impossible to do that on every guitar, because can be a destructive process. So occasionally experimental laboratory conditions arise that it is possible to have a go at that. This is quite baked in grime, I have to say. This is the kind of grime that almost would move, would kind of break it up quicker by a scraping process than a scrubbing process. I'm softening it a bit. I don't even like to use that word because it makes me think of what it is I'm softening, but I'm softening it a bit and then hopefully shifting it. In reality, the chance to pull apart every guitar that comes in with neck pocket cracks is unfeasible. You can't do it. I'm sure most customers wouldn't like you to go, oh yeah, let's just rip the finish apart and look underneath, because that's exactly what you have to do. You have to pull off the finish and explore the wood underneath, and that's completely destructive, as any fool would know. So the chances of doing that are slim, but occasionally, here's the way I look at it. So a little while back, a guitar came in that I knew I was going to refinish, and because it had lots of dents and stuff in it, and I thought, well, since I'm refinishing it, why don't I also pull apart these cracks and see if I can have a look and shed any light on this issue of, are these cracks just in the finish or are they in the wood? Now, if you think about it, that's me doing a random check. So regardless of what your dogma is on the issue or whatever, you can at least agree that I have completely randomly picked one guitar with those types of cracks that I happen to be in a good position to pull apart, and it's mine, and I don't have to apologise to anyone for destroying the surrounding finish. So that's an unusual test opportunity, you will agree, but it's also a very small sample. So what do you think the chances are of the first sample I do, that when I pull the finish off, it reveals that in fact the crack is right into the wood? That would have to be either incredibly lucky. I don't even think it's 50-50, considering that it's a remote sample. If the thesis of many people was true, that these cracks are almost always just in the finish, then the chances of picking a random guitar with those types of cracks, stripping the finish away destructively, and lo and behold finding cracks in the wood as a result, the chances of that must be really slim. And it must be worryingly slim. When you compare it, or you look at it through the thesis that says this almost never happens because the vast majority are always finish cracks. So if you take their hypothesis, you would expect a very, very, very small chance that I would strip off the finish and find wood cracks, according to their hypothesis. Well, I did the experiment and the opposite was true. it was evidently in the wood, and I photographed it, and you can see quite clearly that in that case the cracks go through into the wood. So, you know, it's a very small sample, but it does, it rather than prove my thesis, it disproves, statistically sheds light on the unlikeliness of the, I call it the crack apologists who want to believe it's only in the finish. I think it casts doubt on that, to do it once and find that it confirms the opposite of what they're claiming. So the first chance we had to test it, it disproved the theory, their theory. So you see what I mean? That's a pretty significant laboratory finding, I would say. Some people may not agree with that, but I think logically that would be a sensible start point. Right, I have taken all the years of grime off that fingerboard with the mixture of naphtha and you can see that's the result. So that is going in the bin because I don't ever want to see it again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to polish or hand clean out. Now I'm not going to go into a full kind of polish buff type, you know, finishing on this. It's an old guitar. I'm concentrating on making it as clean as possible, or certainly from the neck point of view, and giving it an all over rub down to remove as much grime as I can possibly remove. But that's sort of where it stops on this, because it's, you know, it's not a showroom baby or a case queen or a concourse ready critter. What I will also do next is I will put some oil on the fretboard, and then we'll be in a position to restring. Now my plan was to do this work today. Sorry, do this chunk of time, and then take a break at home for a while, and then come back and do more tonight. So what I don't know is what the time is currently. Yeah, 1:30. Good, I'm on target. That's good. Whew. I like it. And then before I go, I won't do anything else. I will also check the humidity and see whether I'm being at all realistic or completely unrealistic about spraying those necks. The problem with doing that is that I've got to poly spray them, and they are a bit less sensitive. They'll dry, or they'll set pretty well without worrying too much about slightly raised humidity, whereas sometimes the nitro blooms and does horrible things. So I'm sort of confident that I can do the poly spraying in slightly less than perfectly favourable conditions, but I'm sort of reluctant to do it if it's going to have any struggle to work. We shall see. Right, so I'm going to replace one of these here screws because one of them is rusted, and that seems to me to be a non-starter. So that's going in the bin, or somewhere near the bin, I should say. And a new one is going on the side here. Sorry, off comes the bridge. So, just, I don't even think I've looked at the view down here, have I? Probably not. Okay, so there goes the scratch plate. Just double check it's done up here. Yep. Do this up. Like I say, to buy new pickup surrounds would be, you know, an unnecessary expense. It isn't going to make this guitar perform any better at all. It's just purely cosmetic. Okay, oil. I won't do anything. Right, let's get some strings on and hold this in place. Can you see? Oh yeah, I sort of can see. The string ends is always a good end to watch. So I'll put the camera up there now, because what I would recommend, John, when it comes to stringing, is don't also try not to put so much wire around the tuner posts. Now I'm going to leave the truss rod adjuster off for the time being, because I think we might still need to make a small adjustment, and we'll see how it feels. But what I'll do is I'll just first of all load up these strings, and then we'll prepare to do the middle two first, as discussed. And when I get that all on, we'll take care of those, and you'll see the stringing system that I use. Learned from a gigging guitar or band guitar tech quite a while back. I demonstrated it. I thought it was a neat little system, and been doing it ever since, because it keeps the amount of windings constant, pretty constant, down to a minimum, and is very secure, has never slipped or had any problems with it. So I do recommend it as a system. Okay, so bear with me. I mean, this, in a sense, when John and I discussed this, we didn't really talk about action improvements, but what I was keen to do is to see how low this would go. And part of the reason for that is that I know that John is looking for, or probably could use a light touch, due to health issues and stuff. So I'm hoping that by setting it and low as possible to begin with, at least he's got the option to change it if that's not suitable. So I put the string on, pull it all the way through, pull it back 1 fret, and then wind it on by holding the string and allowing the loose string to go under the held string the first time, and then as it comes round I bend the loose string upwards and allow it to go over the held string the next time round, and then I pull that tight-ish and make it sure it goes over. It's roller saddle. Now we do the D in the same way, and then that should be the nut safely pinned for now. Okay, so pull it all the way through. I grab it at the 1st fret, pull back to the 2nd fret, start winding, hold it tight, lift it over the held string, sorry, the loose string, let the loose string come round again. As it comes round, pull it up, and then push the held string under the loose string as a sort of locking device. And then that's a kind of finite amount, which seems to work. Okay, so that's my, get as little on as possible. And then I cut right to the base of that, because I don't want those darned string wasps biting me. I don't want to inflict them on you, he said, in a sort of pointed comment. Okay, so here goes with the A. Pull back a fret, wind, hold, direct again, hoik the loose one up. As you get more winds for your amount of space, or your 1 fret's worth, you get more or less winds for the thicker strings, of course, but it still seems to work pretty well. Except when you don't put it on the roller, which is easy enough to do when you're restringing. The only kind of harder bit is to do the same operation left-handed when you come over to the left side, or the treble tuner side. So that way, I pull it through, put it on its roller hopefully, pull it through, pull it back 1 fret, and I tend to hold it on the ground on the 1st fret, clamp it with my thumb, not so tight that it pulls it taut, but just enough to allow the loose string to go under the held string first, and then as it comes round I keep hold of the string under tension and direct it underneath the loose one, same deal. And it's usually fallen off the roller by that time, so before I tighten it up I go back to the roller and make sure it's on. And then finally the E string, and the same deal. Pull back 1 fret, hold it with the thumb, wind it, let the held one over the loose one, as around it comes, hold the held one, push it under the loose one. Bob's your uncle. Right, so those are the strings on. Cut-offs away. Oh no, not the strings on, there's 1 big string missing, which I completely missed. The low E. Double. Same applies, although it doesn't really make it quite two all the way around. What I tend to do at that point is cut it now as it faces me, and then pull it taut and let it go around. Well, it's enough. It's just about 2. So the first thing I'll probably do then, whether you can see or not, but grab hold of it and give each of the strings a bit of a tug to make sure it's seated where it needs to be. And just pull up any obvious slack that's in the way, and then we'll. Now you hear that slight creak, so that's the whatever it is with the neck that's doing a very slight creak as we tighten it up. Having played it, I'm not worried about that. Some guitars I would be, and I'd be kind of thinking of taking a neck off, but on this one it's stable, although I have a suspicion that it might be the truss rod. The neck may be pulling against the truss rod, causing that noise as it gets up to strength and loading. Wow, that is amazing, really is. And we're so much lower here as well that it might be worth just dropping these the bridge pickup down very slightly. Otherwise it's going to be just a bit, it's going to be quite a bit closer than the neck one. So we'll just do a little bit of a rebalance on these. Again, it's purely player's preference this, but I'm just balancing them up for tidiness. Now, the problem with this is without refretting this, a good tuning stability already, look at that. Without refretting this, the bendability on those notes is a bit constrained because the frets are fairly flat. And I know that John's other guitar, Parts Caster, beautiful Parts Caster that you'll see soon, that he wants that refretted because he bends the notes on that. Now it may be that he plays differently on that than this, but in a sense they currently suffer from a similar problem. This may maybe have a little more grip than the Strat. Strat fingers kind of slip over the strings. This has got a bit more bite. That's about the only difference. That's very, very good tuning stability straight away. So what I'll do is we'll use this just to tune it up and check the intonation and make any intonation adjustments required. This is another whole area of, I suppose you could call it smoke and mirrors, because when it comes to intonation, the intonation is a function of distance, right? Primarily, and the distance function is that each string, due to its composition and makeup, requires a very slightly separate playing length. Well, good old, what do I call them? Vanson pickups, Vanson bridges. I think this is a Vanson. I'm not sure. Yeah, so it's a function of distance. Each string, because of the virtue of its different composition thickness, requires a slightly different length in order to make it work with all the frets on this neck and the way they're spaced. And the way you can't really measure the difference it requires, and there is no given value because all strings are different, each manufacturer is different, it changes depending on gauge, length of neck and so on. So there's no real reliable set thing where they make a bridge with an absolutely fixed intonation pattern. The nearest you'll get to that is on an acoustic or a wraparound electric bridge. And the reason they did those was kind of contingency, or ease, really. They weren't saying, oh, look, we're so good at dictating or deciding exactly what length this string should be for this, what length, the playing length of the string should be for this guitar. It was a compromise, really. This is perfectly set from the outset. I'm very pleased at that. So there we have it, the Aria. Now I'm just going to check one more thing. Finally, the relief. I think that's perfect. I'm going to put the it's back on, the cover back on, and that's that done. I'm very pleased. It's nice to have one that just works well for a change and doesn't throw up any unexpected surprises. We've got everything out of that we intended to get at a smaller price than doing the full fret leveling, which wouldn't have been good economy really in the given this is an old guitar and its frets are somewhat worn out or coming towards being worn. So I'm very happy with that. There's a beautifully low action which John, if he prefers it higher, can go straight up from that point to his preference. Beautifully low action, everything plays. My wrist is killing me. Beautifully low action and great tuning stability right from the off. So what more could you want? There you go, that's it done. The Aria, don't know the model, Aria Pro II, vintage Les Paul copy. What's that sticking to the side? Some old sticky stuff that's been left on there. Maybe I will just scrape or polish that off with a bit of this stuff. Yeah, so beautiful old thing, done and dusted. Couldn't have got a better result out of it, really, given what we've got in front of us. What can I use? All right, I guess we'll use up this. Yeah, done. So that was a sort of what you call it, sort of a pragmatic setup. Not just doing the same as every guitar, but doing a careful sort of evaluation of what have we got in front of us and why would this be better to do it this way than on this guitar but not on another one. So it's one of those judgment call things. So not everything gets exactly the same treatment, but often many things do because of the fact that the treatment works. Okay, that's cleared that funny blotch of stuff up. There we go. Lovely. Thank you for watching. See you again very soon. Time to disappear back home, get something to eat and get myself set up for an evening session.